And it was consciously done. It's called the Cloward-Piven strategy. It was done with malice aforethought. The damage that that has done and the amount of debt, of new debt, and that, remember guys, that debt was issued in basically a zero interest rate environment. So that's your starting point. 0% interest. If there is any uptick in interest rates, if the Federal Reserve basically loses its grip on the markets and that the actual interest rate market is allowed to emerge in the United States, just having the interest rate uptick from 0% to 3%, which 3% was historically extremely low, just going from 0 to 3, that will mathematically implode the entire system. Just that. We are so painted into a corner with so much debt issued in a zero interest rate environment that any uptick in interest rates will destroy, I mean, we're talking civilizational collapse type destruction. And like I said, it is a mathematical inevitability. Are you going to make the argument that interest rates are going to stay at zero forever? Forever. Because that's what would have to happen. This is the largest financial crime in human history. That's the understatement of the day right there. This is the largest wealth transfer ever seen by many orders of magnitude. You can look back for some historical analogs. You can try to make analogs to Rome and so forth, but I mean, in terms of scope, there is no comparison. Now on page 12, the wealth transfer in the European context. What's happening in Europe is Germany and other Northern European nations who are on better financial footing. They're not on good footing, but they're at least better than the Southern European countries. Okay? The Northern European nations are suffering a debased euro from the European Central Bank printing, while Spain and the other Southern European nations have their currency effectively propped up. See, there's a euro, the euro currency in Europe now. It's not the Spanish currency and the Deutschmark and the French franc and all of these different currencies with all of these different exchange rates. What these jackals did was they put in place the euro currency so that everybody is using the same currency. So what that means is that Germany should have, right now, if there was a Deutschmark, Germany should have a relatively strong Deutschmark. Spain should have a relatively weak peseta. And instead, they both have exactly the same euro with exactly the same buying power. So if you think about it, what that means is that the buying power of the German people is being transferred, is being confiscated and forcibly transferred to the people of Spain and Italy and Portugal and Greece and so on and so forth. You see that? You're robbing from Germany in order to bail out Spain. What happened the last time we tried to do that? This constitutes a massive transfer of wealth from Germany to Spain. What happened the last time Germany was forced to transfer its wealth to the rest of Europe? It was called the Treaty of Versailles. It was signed after World War I. Germany, as the aggressors in World War I, were made to pay reparations to the rest of Europe, in a sense, for World War I. The problem was that the terms of the Treaty of Versailles, paying those reparations, were so extreme that it just bled Germany to death. You say, well, they had it coming for World War I. Yeah, but we've got to think beyond this, because if you destroy these people's economy and there opens up a power vacuum and there's hyperinflation and people are angry and people are desperate and people are in absolute poverty, what does that enable to happen? It allows the ascendancy of some truly, truly nefarious characters. In fact, one of the most nefarious characters in all of human history. That is how Hitler came to power. is through this confiscation of wealth out of Germany and into the rest of Europe. The Treaty of Versailles was reparations for German aggression in World War I. This time, Germany is being punished just for having a stronger economy. I mean, with this dynamic, you could say, yeah, well, World War I, come on, guys, you got to make good on that. There isn't even anything like that going on right now. It's just Germany, you suck because you have a stronger economic system than the fools in Spain and the fools in Italy. And so we're just going to punish you for, in effect, being better. Guys, this is extremely real and extremely dangerous. There are neo-Nazi factions coming to power as we speak in Europe, especially in Greece. The neo-Nazi party in Greece holds a non-trivial percentage of the Greek parliament right now. And these movements are rising all over Europe. You cannot do this. And this also applies somewhat to the United States. Obama the man isn't who I fear, because Obama the man is a slack-jawed, mouth-breathing, drug-addled, sodomite imbecile. I don't fear Obama the man. What everybody needs to watch out for is whoever comes up behind him. Oh, be careful. Oh, be so careful. You have to be so careful with these people who come up out of economic collapse and ruin, because that's your dictator right there. In the U.S. context of wealth transfer on page 13, right now the Federal Reserve prints money to bail out criminal banks who are engaging in massive accounting fraud with the government's full knowledge and encouragement, as we talked about earlier. The Fed also subsidizes with printing profligate government spending. Much of it is fraud, like Solyndra, okay? All of these solar outfits, every single one of them, they have nothing to do with energy. They have nothing to do with the environment or anything green. These are scam, shell companies set up by political cronies of this oligarch class. And all of this money going into these solar and so-called green companies is nothing more than the looting of the United States Treasury by the oligarch class. Solyndra never had any intention of producing anything. None of these companies ever had any intention of producing anything. And the proof is in the pudding. Take Solyndra, for example. In September of 2010, Solyndra was issued a guaranteed government loan of $500 million, $500 million. 12 months later, there were padlocks on the front door. Now, there are some businessmen in the room here. Just think about that. You're setting up a business, you're in the warm-up phases, and you get in $500 million. It would take it far in excess of 12 months to even get warmed up on a $500 million type of a business model. And yet Solyndra had locks on the doors 12 months later. That was looting. It's all just government looting. It is 100% theft and criminality. There is nothing about any of that that has any legitimacy whatsoever. That's what's going on. That's where your tax money is going. You're paying taxes and it's going straight into the hands of these political cronies and oligarchs. This is one of the reasons, a sub-reason, why I've declared a federal tax strike. I'm not doing this anymore. Being forced to pay for abortion is, of course, number one on that list, but this is on the list too. I am not going to work and write these quarterly tax checks to the federal government so that the federal government can turn around and hand this money to their criminal oligarch buddies. I'm not playing anymore. Atlas Shrugged playing out in real life, here it is. Here it is. I'm going galt. I'm not playing. The Federal Reserve artificially keeps interest rates low, thus robbing savers of any interest income, while real-world price inflation increases the cost of living. Think about the retired class in this country right now. These people were basically living off of interest, okay? They have been deprived of almost all of their interest income by this zero interest rate environment. Plus, at the same time, they're looking at real world cost of living inflation. They're getting it on both sides. This is a massive transfer of wealth from the middle class to the oligarch class, i.e. mega banks, politically connected corporations, and almost all politicians. And to a lesser temporary extent, the underclass. But the underclass dynamic, the Obama phones and the welfare, that is very, very temporary. That is just an end. That is just a means to the end. This is classic textbook historical Marxism. Okay, you gin up revolution amongst the underclass, you bribe them and pay them off and get them to give you power in a democratic way by giving them free crap. And then once they no longer serve any purpose, what happens to the underclass? What happened to the underclass under Lenin? What happened to the underclass under Mao? They were murdered, and they were murdered by the tens of millions. So you stand up here and say, well, I'm some elitist and I don't care about the little guy. Are you out of your mind? I love the underclass. They are being set up for a genocide, a Holocaust, an economic genocide. They are being lined up like lambs to the slaughter, just exactly like the proletariat under Lenin and Stalin, and just exactly like the Chinese peasants under Mao, who were murdered by the tens of millions. Do I think I'm more intelligent than they are? Yes, I do. And that's why I have the responsibility to fight this and try to notify them. Yeah, does Pookie in the inner city have any idea what he's being set up for? No. Does that Obama phone lady have any idea what she's being set up for? No, she doesn't. And it is the moral responsibility of people like me and you who understand this and have the intelligence to comprehend this and have the historical knowledge to recognize these patterns playing out all over again. It is our moral responsibility to step into the breach and to stand in front of those people and defend them. You want to call me arrogant because I acknowledge the fact that I'm more intelligent than the Obama phone lady? That's fine. Call me arrogant all day long. But don't you dare say that I didn't step in the breach. And as much as I despise that woman's lifestyle, she doesn't deserve a bullet in the head. And that's what's coming from this government to people like her, over my dead body. Some combination of default, secession, and war is how this is going to play out. That is the solution. Some combination of default, secession, and war in the United States. Secession movements are already moving throughout Europe. And how can you blame them? Catalonia, which is where Barcelona, Spain is, it's in the northeast corner of Spain on the Mediterranean, right up against the French Riviera. They're moving to secede from Spain. Why wouldn't they? The Basque, which is the north-central region of Spain, right there on the Pyrenees Mountains. Now, granted, the Basque have wanted to secede ever since time immemorial, but now they're really, really getting momentum to get out of Spain. Flemish Belgium, not the French-speaking part, but the Flemish speaking part of Belgium. They're moving to secede. Venice is moving to secede from Italy. Venice has historically been its own republic, and in fact, they even speak a slightly different language. They don't speak pure Italian in Venice. They even have their own language. They are looking to secede from Italy, to get away from this poison. Scotland is looking to secede from the UK. Can you blame any of these groups? No, you can't. They're looking for self-preservation. They're looking to get away from these poisoned central banks and central governments. And the corollary to that is, yes, indeed, the United States may balkanize. You bet it could. Could I see a Texas leaving if it got bad enough? Yes, I sure could. And if Texas leaves, you know Oklahoma's going to go with them. You know a bunch of other people are going to go with Texas. Wyoming, I could see a Wyoming seceding. Now, is this a good thing? No, it isn't, because one of the most important tactical advantages we have in the United States is the landmass with these two enormous oceans on either side. And if the United States does balkanize, all you need to do is look at an electoral map to figure out what's going to happen. The communists, these neo-Stalinist idiots, are concentrated on the seaboards, okay? The halfway intelligent people, constitutionalists, let's call them, are concentrated more or less in the center of the landmass. If the United States balkanizes, the neo-Stalinists are going to have the seaports. And when their economies fail, either we're going to have to bail them out, or they're going to be begging the Chinese to come in from the west and the Pacific seaports, and they're going to be begging the Russians to come in and the UN to come in on the eastern ports. And then what? And then what? We're flanked. We're flanked in the middle of the United States, and it's over. So do I see balkanization happening in the United States? Yes, I do. And it terrifies me. It absolutely terrifies me. You know, I've learned to see the Civil War in a more illuminated way over the last several years, but I will give Lincoln this. I presume that what Lincoln was probably thinking was that if the Confederacy was allowed to break away and survive, that it would just become a proxy puppet state for Europe. And he said, we can't have this. We can't have the French or the English or any of these other European concerns basically running the southern half of this continent through the Confederacy. And I think that was probably one of the main reasons in his mind why he was thinking that the Union had to be maintained, because of the literal tactical look at the map. This is not going to be good. This is going to be a disaster if we allow this thing to break apart. And in retrospect, he was right. And we need to heed that lesson again. And what that implies is fighting another civil war. Fighting another civil war just so that the people with common sense who are kind of in favor of the Constitution, so that we can keep tactical control of the seaports out of the hands of these neo-Stalinist imbeciles who would be the death of us all if given half the chance. And we let it get to this. All right, let's talk about credit default swaps on page 14. You need to understand this, even if you're a person who says, I don't have anything to do with any of this. This is credit default swaps. That sounds really complicated. You need to understand this, because this is what is destroying the financial system. And like I said on the very first slide, you deserve to know why. You deserve to know what's going on. And what you'll see is that this stuff isn't very complicated. It's just typical nonsense where these people that are in power put these crazy names on all this stuff and try to dazzle you all out there with BS and try to make you think that, well, there's no way that you simple peasants out there could ever possibly understand any of this high finance. Really, it's quite simple, and you need to understand it so that you can fight back against it. Okay, page 14. U.S. banks and investment entities buy Spanish bonds, let's say. We've been talking about Spain, so let's stick with Spain. What happens if Spain defaults, which is a very real possibility with all of these European countries now? What happens if Spain defaults on their bonds? Well, number one, Citibank borrows money from the Federal Reserve at 0%. So Citibank goes to the discount window, gets as much money as it wants from the Federal Reserve, and gets it at 0%. Next step, Citibank uses that money to buy Spanish bonds at 6%. So it's kind of the same dynamic as we were with before. We've got this 6% spread. Citibank buys credit default swaps on Spanish debt from either J.P. Morgan or Goldman Sachs. Those are the two big purveyors of credit default swaps. Those are the guys who are writing these insurance policies, and you'll see that they're just glorified insurance policies. What Citibank does is it pays J.P. Morgan or Goldman Sachs 1% or 100 basis points. In return, JP Morgan or Goldman Sachs agrees to guarantee Citibank Spanish bonds in the event of a Spanish default. So there's the credit default aspect of credit default swap. If Spain defaults on their credit, JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs says, we will step in and we will make you whole in exchange for you paying us this premium right here. As you can see, this is just insurance, okay?